Okay, so now that I have filled my floor patterns in whatever way you find appropriate, we need to move forward to filling in the shade and shadow. Now, the reason why we do shade and shadow in plans is because it gives us that depth. So it gives us more understanding of what areas are lit, what areas are less lit, and what areas are under the shade and the shadow. It also gives us the depth in or more understanding to the plan, where we start understanding that these walls are higher than the floor level and that these items should drop shadow on the floor. So the first thing I need to do is add the shadows to the walls layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my hatch layer, drag it over the plan just so I can see what the shadows are going to look like. So right now I'm going to double click on the hatch layer. Again, as we said, we don't double click on the text that has the layer's name, nor on the icon, but we double click on the gray area next to it. So once I double click right here, it will immediately take me to the layer style window. And right now I want you to keep an eye on the plan. So if I go to drop shadow, if I just tick drop shadow, you see that right here in the blend options, I'm still in the blend options menu. So anything I change will not take effect because simply the blend options are not turned on. So what I need to do is click on drop shadow right here so it becomes light gray. And only then will I be taken to the options of drop shadow and how the shadow is going to be like on the plan. So right now where is where I want you to look back into the plan and notice how once I start playing around, so right now the angle of my drop shadows are 90 degrees. And if I move it towards say 130 degrees or 145 or whatever, let's keep it 140, I want you to start noticing how these shadows are changing. So I'm going to bring it back again to 90. The change might not be very visible to you, but once I start playing around with the distance, you can see how the shadows are changing and they're becoming more apparent right here. So the distance is how far away my object is from the floor. So obviously, if the object itself is flying away, then the distance should be farther away. So you can see there's a gap right here. If I slightly exaggerate, you can see that there is a gap between the shadow and the bottom of the object. Now, since our objects are coming off the floor, so that means the distance needs to be really small. Sorry, not the opacity. I'm altering the opacity. I'm going to go back to the distance and make it really small so that it's still apparent, but the distance is zero technically. So once I start looking at the spread, it's not going to be very apparent, but once I start looking at the size, you can see how the shadow is dropping off. But once I start playing around with the spread, it becomes more and more apparent. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing around with my shadows until I find a shadow that fits what I'm looking for. I'm going to make it slightly bigger distance, maybe less spread, or maybe more spread, less size, and so on. You're going to keep on playing with it until you start appreciating or you start seeing this depth into the plan. So maybe this looks okay to me. Let's just play around with the opacity. Opacity is how transparent the shadow is. Distance, as we said, is how far away the object is from the floor. Spread is how far away is the shadow spreading. And size is the size of the object. So obviously, if the object is longer, then it should cast different shadows than if the object was shorter or closer to the area where the shadow is being casted. So you're going to have to be playing around with your shadow until you like the shadow that you have. You can also play around with the angle, and that depends on where the light is coming from. So once you like it, you can just click on OK, and now you have casted your wall shadows onto the floor next to it. So you can see now that you can clearly see that these walls are higher than your floor plan. In the next tutorial, we'll be covering the shade and not just the shadow, the shading and lighting of the room.